Hello, welcome. Here we are once again. Hopefully once again. This might be the first one for all of you. It's not the first one for me, obviously. Practice and all that other great stuff. For those of you who are just joining us, joining me, joining this, we are gonna go through my little reads, right? That's what we're gonna do. And I'm Dee. Here we go. First and foremost, we have Reflections on a Gift of Watermelon Pickle and Other Modern Verse, which is compiled by Stephen Dunning, Edward Lueders, and Hugh Smith. We are going to start with this. To look at anything, if you would know that thing, you must look at it long. To look at this green and say, I have seen spring in these woods will not do. You must be the thing you see. You must be the dark snakes of stems and ferny plumes of leaves. You must enter in to the small silences between the leaves. You must take your time and touch the very peace they issue from. John Moffat. I am not going to edit these videos. I am going to let them run as they run because I would like an unedited version of life reflected back to me. I think that's why people like live streams so much, because they are not the curated or edited videos, which are beautiful little forms of art and synopsises, but I am looking to simply be present, not necessarily curate. I am creating. I am not curating, though. I am not planning this entirely with an end goal vision. I am trying to allow it to be a moment that I share in the present. So you're gonna get my blunders, you're gonna get my hair whoops, you're gonna get my mistakes when I read, you're gonna get my whoops because I have to go back through and restart that sentence over, that line over, that word over, and that's real life. So, and that's what I like. Anyways, on to the next one. We are going to read from, oh, this might get me some hate. This is exciting. A Feminist Response to Pop Culture, Bitch, their Wild Edition. This is their fall winter of 2021. I think this is their most recent currently. Anyways, we're gonna read one of those articles. This is called Dispatch from the Suburbs by Shaylee Coran. Mowed down inside the growing anti-lawn movement. What's more American than a perfect lawn? Picture it, neat, plush, and deeply green expanses connecting rows of houses, giving homeowners a sense of pride and their children a safe place to play. But not everyone sees the lawn that way. If you're wondering why people would be opposed to grass, look for the memes. In one TikTok video, user SkyKnower dances in front of pictures of moss while on-screen text lists reasons that people should grow moss instead of grass. Great for water retention and drainage, doesn't need pesticides, and simply beautiful. Anti-lawn memes began proliferating more widely in 2020, and there is a growing awareness that lawns might be a waste of space and resources. A 2018 article in the peer-reviewed journal Science claims lawns are the largest irrigated non-food crop in the United States. Despite its name, Kentucky bluegrass, the most popular grass grown for lawns, comes from Europe, Northern Asia, and Northern Africa. Non-native plants usually don't survive well on their own in new regions. Kentucky bluegrass goes dormant in droughts and turns yellow. So these lawns need regular watering, fertilizers, and sometimes pesticides. According to Scientific American, runoff from fertilizers and pesticides can pollute our waterways. The larger the lawn, the more water, time, money, and other resources are needed to maintain it. The environmental cost of lawns became more widely discussed in 2015 when Californians used the hashtag drought shaming on Twitter to chastise celebrities, wealthy people, and sometimes their neighbors for not conserving water. In Los Angeles, a resident known as the Wet Prince of Bel-Air used 11.8 million gallons of water a year, 100 times more than the average American family. Tabloids cashed in on the public's anger by publishing aerial photos of celebrities' homes during the drought, exposing the thriving green lawns of the Kardashians, Barbra Streisand, Tom Selleck, and other celebrities. In 2015, Megan Garber covered the phenomenon of drought shaming in an Atlantic piece that argued lawns were symbols of American entitlement. Ultimately, drought shaming characterized green lawns as synonymous with excess. And a growing anti-lawn community also started to scrutinize privatized green spaces, including golf courses. The concept of some people being allowed onto spaces like golf courses and country clubs only to perform the labor necessary to maintain those spaces for the rich is a clear indicator of inequality and greed. In 2020, Abby Richards, a climate studies student, went viral for her TikTok videos opposing golf courses. In a video with more than 2 million views, Richards states that if she were president, she'd turn golf courses into public parks and country clubs into low-income housing. It's such an injustice, essentially, for the rich to be able to privatize their green spaces because access to a green space is a really important part of people's physical and mental health. Richards told USA Today. Lawns are also representative of whiteness. The non-native grass, now ubiquitous in North America, was originally grown here for the purpose of settler agriculture. In the 1600s, livestock brought from Europe to North America began to starve because of the lack of grass for grazing. Colonists imported seeds to grow plants like Kentucky bluegrass, interfering with the environment and creating a monoculture that now drives away bees, butterflies, and other pollinator insects. This grass was later used by prominent figures such as George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, who had a vested interest in replicating the European elite's great sprawling lawns, which had no agricultural value but displayed high status. New York Times senior video journalist David Boddy reports on this, pointing out that though Washington and Jefferson helped popularize lawns in America, enslaved people were the ones to actually maintain them. By the late 1800s, new technologies like the first lawnmower and the first sprinkler grew the business of lawn care for wealthy suburbanites. But the post-World War II era marked the beginning of lawn care as a mainstay in white American culture. In her 1994 book, The Lawn, A History of an American Obsession, Virginia Scott Jenkins writes about how the lawn care industry rode the wave of post-war economic recovery to appeal to middle-class homeowners during a housing boom. The lawn was the essence of America for young men and women who had witnessed foreign, war-torn landscapes, Jenkins writes, adding that by the 1950s, front lawns had become an integral part of the physical and cultural American landscape. Homeowners associations, HOAs, gained popularity during this era because white homeowners felt the need to regulate the growth of suburbs by keeping Black Americans out. It's not a stretch to suggest that a suburban lawn still represents whiteness and wealth. despite its present-day prevalence in increasingly diverse middle-class neighborhoods. People of color and immigrants who aspire to the American dream can replicate the exclusionary ideals the dream is built upon. In 2020, Business Insider reported that even today, HOAs tend to target Black homeowners for things their white neighbors aren't fined for. Considering that there are more than 370,000 HOAs in America, representing more than 50% of all households, foregoing lawns and creating more biodiverse spaces may not be as easy as one might hope. In fact, thanks to municipal regulations, people deal with harsh fines and even jail time for failing to maintain neat lawns. Frank Yos, a then 57-year-old in Grand Prairie, Texas, was jailed for 2 days in 2015 because he couldn't afford the $1,700 fine the city slapped him with for an overgrown lawn. In 2019, the city of Dunedin, Florida, fined then 69-year-old Jim Ficken $30,000 for his unkept lawn, which was growing tall while Ficken was away caring for his sick mother. He was 69, caring for his sick mother, not home. They fined him $30,000. I'm sorry, do you have 30 grand because you can't afford, because you aren't home to mow your lawn? At 69. I'm sorry, like, the man has lived 7 decades. 7 decades. Is not home because his mother, who is older than him, had 7 decades, is ill and he's caring for her. I know people who don't even make that in a year. Oh wait, we all do. So many of us don't make that in a year for a lawn. What the fuck? What the puck, chuck, duck, truck, suck, luck. What the luck? What the luck? I really hope my channel doesn't have to be 18 plus, but it might have to be, but it's really not. It's just that words have meanings, and y'all are more concerned about me being expressive than words that actually are harmful. So we'll see how long I last. Anyways, oh my gosh. The city then moved to foreclose on his home. On the other hand, some municipalities are now encouraging people to ditch lawn culture. Burbank, California is offering up to $2 for each square foot of ripped up grass, incentivizing residents and businesses to create water-wise landscapes. People are also banding together against lawn culture. The No Lawns subreddit, created in early 2019, features daily posts from people seeking and sharing advice on growing more native plants and disregarding the boring grassy lawn. I want that subreddit right now. I can, I'm recording. Ha. Food Not Lawns, a 25-year-old international community promoting sustainable gardening, shares options for people feeling overwhelmed by the prospect of getting rid of their lawns, including planting things you love to eat and collaborating with your neighbors. If it sounds like too much work, the Canadian Wildlife Federation suggests taking the wild patch approach and leaving a section of your lawn unmowed. While many think that lawns are too deeply embedded in our expectations of how outdoor space is cultivated and maintained, it's important to remember that lawns are a recent mainstay in North American culture. It's easy to be incredulous about the criticisms of being made about lawns, but the environmental cost of lawns, their history, and their present existence as a fruitless status symbol is glaring. Having a lawn doesn't make you a bad person, but if you're privileged enough to own land, recognize the potential of what your space could be. Environmentally friendly, biodiverse, and simply more interesting. Shaylee Coran is a Toronto-based writer. Find her on Twitter at Shaylee Coran and Instagram at shaylee.jpg. That's Shaylee is Shailee, and Coran is Koranne. Yeah, spelled the same. Dope. Fun shit. Fun-ish. All right, look here. If I post these, someone can edit them for me. Y'all can have a blast on that, and y'all can go through and have a clean version and a regular version, or whatever else versions you want. But the original is always going to be this, because I am multiplicitous. That's a word now. I think it is an actual word. But we'll find a forum however we need to, but this is what it's going to be. Anyways, next quick little article comes from Jacobine. This is their summer 2021 article, issue titled The Working Class. And we are going to read from the tumbril, which is apparently King the Boss's car. We've all wanted to in there do fun times. Awesome. So this one is called The Problem Isn't Classism, It's Class. And this is by Megan Day, and that is Megan spelled Meagan, Day, D-A-Y. Obviously, by giving credit to all of these, I am saying I am not the writer or the original author. I am simply providing you... Give me a second. Pardon the interruption, but obviously we have real lives and the mail comes, and if we leave it in the hallway, then sometimes it disappears, but not often. So, continuing, I suppose. Oh, but obviously these are not mine. I am providing you a way to hear them, because, and also provide you access to resources. Obviously, if you want to learn more about them, go to Jacobine. Great site. They have wonderful information and sources that I am simply providing. I am not claiming any of this. Same thing with bitch. Same thing with the poetry. Please look up this author. Please go find these things. Please go find them. I'm just talking them out loud. That's it. Because sometimes it's just easier to listen, to put it on in the background and to hear it. Consider me your friendly librarian. I have no original content other than everyone else's original content, but that's actually not true. But for this sake, it is true. None of this is original content unless otherwise dictated. All right, moving on. Now that we've had that little spiel, just please don't sue me. If you don't want your stuff up, I mean, it's exposure. It's just exposure. I'm not trying to claim your credit for your ideas. I'm never gonna, like, I don't know. Please don't sue me. Information is weird in this day and age. Why is information copyrighted? Anyways, the problem isn't classism, it's class. Under capitalism, prejudice against workers is common, but it only adds insult to injury. Ooh. Okay. But it only adds insult to injury. Oh, but it only adds insult to a deeper, more profound injury. I feel calmer now. In 2011, higher-ups at the pharmaceutical distribution giant AmerisourceBergen amused themselves by circulating an email poking fun at some of their customers. It adapted the Beverly Hillbillies theme song to the intensifying opioid crisis, with new lyrics imagining Jed, a poor mountaineer who barely kept his habit fed, driving a crew of Appalachian hillbillies across state lines to stock up on hillbilly heroin at unscrupulous pain clinics. In AmerisourceBergen's corporate offices, working-class drug consumption habits weren't merely a source of entertainment, but a matter of professional interest. The company is one of the nation's top distributors of drugs like OxyContin, and it's alleged in multiple state lawsuits to have worked directly with pill mills, what the parody lyrics called cash and carry clinics, to increase opioid sales. Executives and team leaders also referred to hillbillies and pillbillies in ordinary business-related correspondence. These emails, presented at trial in opioid-ravaged West Virginia earlier this year, earned the company bad press in the Washington Post and other mainstream outlets. Social media onlookers condemned the corporate culture at AmerisourceBergen as distasteful, ugly, classist. Classism isn't exactly a household term, but it has its partisans. It describes an array of social practices linked to offensive attitudes that are, as the AmerisourceBergen episode illustrates, real and common. Anyone who's been privy to the casual conversations of the rich knows how pervasive class prejudice is, and everyone else can easily imagine it. That makes classism a tempting addition to our rhetorical arsenal. But the word also has disadvantages, chief among them an emphasis on insult over injury. At best, it functions as a convenient shorthand for social oppression. At worst, though, classism mystifies the nature of capitalist domination and elicits solutions that clean up economic elites' images without interrupting the process of exploitation that gives them power. Talk of classism is primarily initiated by conscientious liberals. Talk of classism is primarily initiated by conscientious liberals who are repulsed by epithets like pillbillies and earnestly want all forms of bigotry and negative stereotyping to end. Their natural inclination is to add working class to the list of identities that should be respected and celebrated. But class is not primarily an identity. While capitalist society does boast distinct class structures, they rest on a material foundation, not an ideological one. All pride, shame, and disrespect aside, the fact is that a small minority owns nearly all of society's productive assets. This situation produces a highly unequal relationship between that minority and everyone else who has to sell their labor to capitalists, always for less than it's worth. Always for less than it's worth. The difference being kept as profit in order to survive. This situation produces a highly unequal relationship between that minority and everyone else who has to sell their labor to capitalists, always for less than it's worth, the difference being kept as profit in order to survive. Everyone else who has to sell their labor to capitalists in order to survive, because it is always sold to capitalists for less than it's worth in order to keep the difference as profit. On top of this direct exploitation, many capitalists line their coffers by preying on workers, taking advantage of the externalities created by the foundational dynamic. They include corporate landlords, health insurance providers, and pharmaceutical distributors like AmerisourceBergen that intentionally place products in regions already distressed by outsourcing and austerity, where the working class is especially susceptible to drug abuse. Class attitudes arise from the exploitation at the heart of capitalism and the material inequalities it perpetuates, not the other way around. For various political and psychological reasons, the wealthy minority seeks both private affirmation and public justification for its domination of the working class majority, which gives rise to all kinds of nauseating ideas about its inherent superiority. But these are just rationalizations. Class domination is happening under capitalism regardless of people's impressions of one another. Theoretically, we could make all outward expressions of class prejudice taboo, but many wealthy people would probably still harbor private biases that justify their advantages, even if we could somehow instill in the hearts and minds of all elites a genuine respect for everyone else, Such superior values can never be realized as long as private ownership continues to serve as the basis of our economy. Even if we could somehow instill in the hearts and minds of all elites a genuine respect for everyone else, such superior values can never be realized as long as private ownership continues to serve as the basis of our economy. Imagine that AmerisourceBergen executives learn to keep a lid on their bigoted opinions. Now imagine, more fancifully, that the company was able to actually root out deep-seated class bias through educational seminars and hiring initiatives focused on recruiting people from working class backgrounds. Indeed, some firms in the rapidly growing cottage industry of corporate diversity include trainings on class prejudice in their programming. If the corporate culture were thus transformed, but the business model remained the same, there would be fewer crass emails, but outcomes for executives and consumers would not meaningfully change. That's because AmerisourceBergen doesn't exist to realize its executives' cultural values. Like all corporations, it exists to generate profit. Its activities throughout the opioid crisis don't derive from executives' desire to hurt and humiliate people of a lower social rank, but from the company's rigid mandate to produce maximum value for a long list of shareholders, including BlackRock, Vanguard, and JP Chase. Respect is always desirable, but it's a far more modest goal than equality. We shouldn't limit our ambitions to better decorum in the face of class difference. Instead, we must understand class as a form of difference that should not and need not exist at all. All right. Oh, now we've had our little, all that other great stuff. Let us get into chapter 2, I suppose. We're about 30 minutes in. Here we go. I am currently reading The Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. This is 5 novels in one outrageous volume. This is chapter 2 of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Here's what the Encyclopedia Galactica has to say about alcohol. It says that alcohol is a colorless, volatile liquid formed by the fermentation of sugars, and also notes its intoxicating effects on certain carbon-based life forms. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy also mentions alcohol. It says that the best drink in existence is the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster. It says that the effect of drinking a Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster is like having your brains smashed out by a slice of lemon wrapped round a large gold brick. The guide also tells you on which planets the best Pan-Galactic Gargle Blasters are mixed, how much you can expect to pay for one, and what voluntary organizations exist to help you rehabilitate afterward. The guide even tells you how you can mix one yourself. Take the juice from one bottle of Old Jank's spirit, it says. Pour into it 1 measure of water from the seas of Santranginus V or 5. Oh, that Santranginian seawater, it says. Oh, those Santranginian fish. Allow 3 cubes of Arcturan Megagen to melt into the mixture. It must be properly iced, or the benzine is lost. Allow 4 liters of Phalian marsh gas to bubble through it, in memory of all those happy hikers who have died of pleasure in the marshes of Phalia. Over the back of a silver spoon, float a measure of quoloctin hypermint extract, redolent of all the heady odors of the dark quoloctin zones, subtle, sweet, and mystic. Drop in the tooth of an Algolian sun tiger. Watch it dissolve, spreading the fires of the Algolian suns deep into the heart of the drink. Sprinkle Zamphor. Add an olive. Drink, but very carefully. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy sells rather better than the Encyclopedia Galactica. "6 pints of bitter," said Ford Prefect to the barman of the Horse and Groom, "and quickly, please. The world's about to end." The barman of the Horse and Groom didn't deserve this sort of treatment. He was a dignified old man. He pushed his glasses up his nose and blinked at Ford Prefect. Ford ignored him and stared out the window, so the barman looked instead at Arthur, who shrugged helplessly and said nothing. So the barman said, "Oh yes, sir. Nice weather for it," and started pulling pints. He tried again. "Going to watch the match this afternoon, then?" Ford glanced round at him. No point," he said, and looked back out the window. "What's that? Foregone conclusion, then, you reckon, sir?" said the barman. "Arsenal without a chance?" No, said Ford. "It's just that the world's about to end." "Oh, yes, sir, so you said," said the barman, looking over his glasses this time at Arthur. "Lucky escape for Arsenal, if it did." Ford looked back at him, genuinely surprised. "No, not really," he said. He frowned. The barman breathed in heavily. "There you are, sir, 6 pints, he said. Arthur smiled at him wanly and shrugged again. He turned and smiled wanly at the rest of the pub, just in case any of them had heard what was going on. None of them had, and none of them could understand what he was smiling at them for. A man sitting next to Ford at the bar looked at the 2 men, looked at the 6 pints, did a swift burst of mental arithmetic, arrived at an answer he liked, and grinned a stupid, hopeful grin at them. "Get off," said Ford. "They're ours. giving him a look that would have made an Algolian sun tiger get on with it. Get on with what it was doing. Ford slapped a 5-pound note on the bar. He said, "Keep the change." "What, from a fiver?" "Thank you, sir." "You've got 10 minutes left to spend it." The barman decided simply to walk away for a bit. "Ford," said Arthur, "would you please tell me what the hell is going on?" "Drink up," said Ford. "You've got 3 pints to get through." "3 pints," said Arthur, "at lunchtime?" The man next to Ford grinned and nodded happily. Ford ignored him. He said, "Time is an illusion. Lunchtime doubly so." "Very deep," said Arthur. "You should send that into the Reader's Digest. They've got a page for people like you." "Drink up." "Why 3 pints all of a sudden?" "Muscle relaxant." Muscle relaxant. You'll need it." "Muscle relaxant. Muscle relaxant." Arthur started into his beer. "Did I do anything wrong today?" he said, "or has the world always been like this, and I've been too wrapped up in myself to notice?" "All right," said Ford, "I'll try to explain. How long have we known each other?" How long? Arthur thought. About 5 years, maybe 6, he said. Most of it seemed to make some kind of sense at the time. "All right," said Ford. "How would you react if I said I'm not from Guildford at all, after all, but from a small planet somewhere in the vicinity of Betelgeuse?" Arthur shrugged in a so-so sort of way. "I don't know," he said, taking a pull of beer. "Why? Do you think it's the sort of thing you're likely to say?" Ford gave up. It really wasn't worth bothering at the moment, what with the world being about to end and all. He just said, "Drink up." He added, perfectly factually, "The world's about to end." Arthur gave the rest of the pub another wan smile. The rest of the pub frowned at him. A man waved at him to stop smiling at them and mind his own business. "This must be Thursday," said Arthur to himself, sinking low over his beer. "Never could get the hang of Thursdays." Chapter 3. On this particular Thursday, something was moving quietly through the ionosphere many miles above the surface of the planet. Several somethings, in fact. Several dozen huge, yellow, chunky, slab-like somethings. Huge as office blocks, silent as birds, they soared with ease, basking in electromagnetic rays from the star Sol, biding their time, grouping, preparing. The planet beneath them was almost perfectly oblivious of their presence, which was just how they wanted it for the moment. The huge yellow something went unnoticed at Goonhilly. They passed over Cape Canaveral without a blip. Woomera and Jodrell Bank looked straight through them, which was a pity because it was exactly the sort of thing they'd been looking for all these years. The only place they registered at all was on a small black device called a sub-etha sensomatic, which winked away quietly to itself. It nestled in the darkness inside a leather satchel which Ford Prefect habitually wore slung around his neck. The contents of Ford Prefect's satchel were quite interesting, in fact, and would have made any Earth physicist's eyes pop out of his head. Which is why he always concealed them by keeping a couple of dog-eared scripts for plays he pretended he was auditioning for stuffed in the top. Besides the sub-etha sensomatic and the scripts, he had an electronic thumb, a short, squat black rod, smooth and matte, with a couple of flat switches and dials at one end. He also had a device that looked rather like a largest electronic calculator. This had about 100 tiny flat press buttons and a screen about 4 inches square, on which any one of 1,000,000 pages could be summoned at a moment's notice. It looked insanely complicated, and this was one of the reasons why the snug plastic cover it fitted into had the words "Don't Panic" printed on it in large, friendly letters. The other reason was that this device was, in fact, the most remarkable of all books ever to come out of the great publishing corporation of Ursa Minor. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The reason why it was published in the form of a microsub meson electronic component is that if it were printed in normal book form, an interstellar hitchhiker would require several inconveniently large buildings to carry it around in. Beneath that in Ford Prefect's satchel were a few ballpoints, a notepad, and a largest bath towel from Marks & Spencer. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy has a few things to say on the subject of towels. A towel, it says, is about the most massively useful thing an interstellar hitchhiker can have. Partly, it has great practical value. You can wrap it around you for warmth as you bound across the cold moons of Jagland Beta. You can lie on it in the brilliant marble-sanded beaches of Santraginus 5, inhaling the heady sea, Santraginus V, inhaling the heady sea vapors. You can sleep under it beneath the stars which shine so redly on the desert world of Kakrafun. Use it to sail a mini-raft down the slow, heavy river Moth. Wet it for use in hand-to-hand combat. Wrap it round your head to ward off noxious fumes or avoid the gaze of the ravenous bug-bladder beast of Trawl. A mind-bogglingly stupid animal. It assumes that if you can't see it, it can't see you. Deft as a brush, but very, very ravenous. You can wave your towel in emergencies as the distress signal, and of course, dry yourself off with it, if it still seems to be clean enough. More importantly, a towel has immense psychological value. For some reason, if a strag, not hitchhiker, discovers that a hitchhiker has his towel with him, he will automatically assume that he is also in possession of a toothbrush, washcloth, soap, tin of biscuits, flask, compass, map, ball of string, gnat spray, wet weather gear, spacesuit, etc., etc. Furthermore, the strag will then happily lend the hitchhiker any of these or a dozen other items that the hitchhiker might accidentally have lost. What the strag will think is that any man who can hitch the length and breadth of a galaxy, rough it, slum it, struggle against terrible odds, win through, and still know where his towel is clearly a man to be reckoned with. Hence a phrase that has passed into hitchhiking slang, as in, hey, you sass that Hoopy Ford prefect? There's a frood who really knows where his towel is. Sass. Know, be aware of, meet, have sex with. Hoopy. Really together guy. Frood. Really amazingly together guy. So to translate that sentence just for fun. Hey, you aware of that really together guy, Ford prefect? Now, there's a really amazingly together guy who really knows where his towel is. Nestling quietly on top of the towel in Ford Prefect's satchel, the sub-ethos sensomatic began to wink more quickly. Miles above the surface of the planet, the huge yellow somethings began to fan out. At Jodrell Bank, someone decided it was time for a nice relaxing cup of tea. You got a towel with you? Said Ford suddenly to Arthur. Arthur, struggling through his third pint, looked round at him. Why? What? No. Should I have? He had given up being surprised. There didn't seem to be any point any longer. Ford clicked his tongue in irritation. Drink up, he urged. At that moment, the dull sound of a rumbling crash from outside filtered through the low murmur of the pub, through the sound of the jukebox, through the sound of the man next to Ford hiccuping over the whiskey Ford had eventually bought him. Arthur choked on his beer, leaped to his feet. What's that? He yelped. Don't worry, said Ford. They haven't started yet. Thank God for that, said Arthur, and relaxed. It's probably just your house being knocked down, said Ford, downing his last pint. What? Shouted Arthur. Suddenly Ford's spell was broken. Arthur looked wildly around him and ran to the window. My God, they are! They're knocking my house down! What the hell am I doing in the pub, Ford? It hardly makes a difference at this stage, said Ford. Let them have their fun. Fun, yelped Arthur. Fun? He quickly checked out the window again that they were talking about the same thing. Damn their fun, he hooted, and ran out of the pub, furiously waving a nearly empty beer glass. He made no friends at all in the pub that lunchtime. Stop, you vandals! You homewreckers, bawled Arthur. You half-crazed Visigoths, stop, will you? Ford would have to go after him. Turning quickly to the barman, he asked for 4 packets of peanuts. There you are, sir, said the barman, slapping the packets on the bar. 28 pence, if you'd be so kind. Ford was very kind. He gave the barman another £5 note and told him to keep the change. The barman looked at it and then looked at Ford. He suddenly shivered. He experienced a momentary sensation that he didn't understand because no one on Earth had ever experienced it before. In moments of great stress, every life form that exists gives out a tiny subliminal signal. This signal simply communicates an exact and almost pathetic sense of how far that being is from the place of his birth. On Earth, it is never possible to be farther than 16,000 miles from your birthplace, which really isn't very far, so such signals are too minute to be noticed. Ford Prefect was at this moment under great stress, and he was born 600 light years away in the near vicinity of Betelgeuse. The barman reeled for a moment, hit by a shocking, incomprehensible sense of distance. He didn't know what it meant, but he looked at Ford Prefect with a new sense of respect, almost awe. "Are you serious, sir?" he said in a small whisper which had the effect of silencing the pub. "You think the world's going to end?" "Yes," said Ford. "But this afternoon." Ford had recovered himself. He was at his flippest. "Yes," he said gaily, "in less than 2 minutes, I would estimate." The barman couldn't believe this conversation he was having, but he couldn't believe the sensation he had just had either. "Isn't there anything we can do about it, then?" he said. "No, nothing," said Ford, stuffing the peanuts into his pocket. Someone in the hushed bar suddenly laughed raucously at how stupid everyone had become. The man sitting next to Ford was a bit sozzled by now. His eyes weaved their way up to Ford. "I thought," he said, "that if the world was going to end, we were meant to lie down or put a paper bag over our head or something." "If you like, yes," said Ford. "That's what they told us in the army," said the man, and his eyes began the long trek back toward his whiskey. "Will that help?" asked the barman. "No," said Ford, and gave him a friendly smile. "Excuse me," he said, "I've got to go." With a wave, he left. The pub was silent for a moment longer, and then, embarrassingly enough, the man with the raucous laugh did it again. The girl he had dragged along to the pub with him had grown to loathe him dearly over the last hour, and it would probably have been a great satisfaction to her to know that in a minute and a half or so he would suddenly evaporate into a whiff of hydrogen, ozone, and carbon monoxide. However, when the moment came, she would be too busy evaporating herself to notice it. The barman cleared his throat. He heard himself say, "Last orders, please." The huge yellow machines began to sink downward and to move faster. Ford knew they were there. This wasn't the way he had wanted it. Running up the lane, Arthur had nearly reached his house. He didn't notice how cold it had suddenly become. He didn't notice the wind. He didn't notice the sudden irrational squall of rain. He didn't notice anything but the caterpillar bulldozers crawling over the rubble that had been his home. "You barbarians," he yelled. "I'll sue the council for every penny it's got. I'll have you hung, drawn and quartered, and whipped, and boiled until you've had enough." Ford was running after him very fast. Very, very fast. "And then I will do it again," yelled Arthur, "and when I've finished, I will take all the little bits, and I will jump on them." Arthur didn't notice that the men were running from the bulldozers. He didn't notice that Mr. Prosser was staring hectically into the sky. What Mr. Prosser had noticed was that the huge yellow somethings were screaming through the clouds. Impossibly huge yellow somethings. "And I will carry on jumping on them," yelled Arthur, still running, "until I get blisters, or I can think of anything even more unpleasant to do. And then—" Arthur tripped and fell headlong, rolled and landed flat on his back. At last he noticed that something was going on. His finger shot upward. "What the hell's that?" he shrieked. Whatever it was raced across the sky in its monstrous yellowness, tore the sky apart with mind-boggling noise, and leaped off into the distance, leaving the gaping air to shut behind it with a bang that drove your ears 6 feet into your skull. Another one followed and did exactly the same thing, only louder. It's difficult to say exactly what the people on the surface of the planet were doing now, because they didn't really know what they were doing themselves. None of it made a lot of sense, running into houses, running out of houses, howling noiselessly at the noise. All around the world, city streets exploded with people, cars skidded into each other as the noise fell on them and then rolled off like tidal wave over hills and valleys, deserts and oceans, seeming to flatten everything it hit. Only one man stood and watched the sky, stood with terrible sadness in his eyes and rubber bungs in his ears. He knew exactly what was happening and had known ever since his sub-etha sensomatic had started winking in the dead of night beside his pillow and awakened him with a start. It was what he had waited for all these years, but when he had deciphered the signal patterns sitting alone in his small dark room, a coldness had gripped him and squeezed his heart. Of all the races and all of the galaxy who could have come and said a big hello to planet Earth, he thought. Didn't it just have to be the Vogons? Still, he knew what he had to do. As the Vogon craft screamed through the air high above him, he opened his satchel. He threw away a copy of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. He threw away a copy of Godspell. He wouldn't need them where he was going. Everything was ready. Everything was prepared. He knew where his towel was. A sudden silence hit the earth. If anything, it was worse than the noise. For a while, nothing happened. The great ships hung motionless in the sky over every nation on earth. Motionless they hung, huge, heavy, steady in the sky, a blasphemy against nature. Many people went straight into shock as their minds tried to encompass what they were looking at. The ships hung in the sky in much the same way that bricks don't. And still, nothing happened. Then there was a slight whisper, a sudden spacious whisper of open ambient sound. Every hi-fi set in the world, every radio, every television, every cassette recorder, every woofer, every tweeter, every mid-range driver in the world quietly turned itself on. Every tin can, every dustbin, every window, every car, every wine glass, every sheet of rusty metal became activated as an acoustically perfect sounding board. Before the Earth passed away, it was going to be treated to the very ultimate in sound reproduction, the greatest public address system ever built. But there was no concert, no music, no fanfare, just a simple message. "People of Earth, your attention, please," a voice said, and it was wonderful. Wonderful, perfect, quadraphonic sound with distortion levels so low as to make a brave man weep. This is Prostetnik Vogon Jeltz of the Galactic Hyperspace Planning Council, the voice continued. As you will no doubt be aware, the plans for development of the outlying regions of the galaxy require the building of a hyperspatial express route through your star system, and regrettably, your planet is one of those scheduled for demolition. The process will take slightly less than 2 of your Earth minutes. Thank you. The PA died away. Uncomprehending terror settled on the watching people of Earth. The terror moved slowly through the gathered crowds as if they were iron filings on a sheet of board and a magnet was moving beneath them. Panic sprouted again, desperate fleeing panic, but there was nowhere to flee to. Observing this, the Vogons turned on their PA again. It said, "There's no point in acting all surprised about it. All the planning charts and demolition orders have been on display in your local planning department in Alpha Centauri for 50 of your Earth years, so you've had plenty of time to lodge any formal complaint, and it's far too late to start making a fuss about it now." The PA fell silent again, and its echo drifted across the land. The huge ship turned slowly in the sky with easy power. On the underside of each, a hatchway opened, an empty black square. By this time, somebody somewhere must have manned a radio transmitter, located a wavelength, and broadcast a message back to the Vogon ships to plead on behalf of the planet. Nobody ever heard what they said. They only heard the reply. The PA slammed back into life again. The voice was annoyed. It said, "What do you mean you've never been to Alpha Centauri? For heaven's sake, mankind, it's only 4 light years away, you know. I'm sorry, but if you can't be bothered to take an interest in local affairs, that's your own lookout. Energize the demolition beams." Light poured out of the hatchways. "I don't know," said the voice on the PA. "Apathetic, bloody planet. I've no sympathy at all." It cut off. There was a terrible, ghastly silence. There was a terrible, ghastly noise. There was a terrible, ghastly silence. The Vogon constructor fleet coasted away into the inky, starry void. And there we have it, folks. All right, so now that we have done a nice little fun time, I have been Dee. This has been a great hour for my brain. I hope you have enjoyed. I hope you have been entertained at the very least and found it interesting. I don't seek to be much, I just seek to be interesting. So once again, returning to the reflections on a gift of watermelon pickle and other modern verse, compiled by Dunning, Lueders, and Smith. We have absolutes from an ink painting by Seho. Black on white, crow in snow, hunched, wet lump, on brittle branch, remembering warmth, remembering corn, miserable as life is black on white. Gustav Kaiser. This has been a lovely day with you all. Till next time. Deuces.